Not quite. Ah, there we are.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, members of the public, to the extent there are any. Do we know how, I asked this question before, is there somewhere you can look and see how many people are watching, tuning in to us
Yeah,
live?
you can go onto YouTube and you can see.
Where?
Yes, we can find out.
Actually, yeah, up here, right. So it says, doesn't tell me a number. I hit the YouTube.
I think Scott's the one who needs to be doing that. We can't go over it.
I'm just curious because I've taken the habit of welcoming the public, and sometimes I don't know whether there is anybody from the public there. But I guess safe better than sorry.
Well, and Michael, remember, they may not be with us in the moment. They may be watching it later.
Right.
Right now, Senator, this rock, and there's one. I think that might just be me, though. So,
Oh, okay.
but they
It's very-
typically do turn
Very
in.
popular.
It's interesting. I think Randy and I put a bill in like 4 years ago to pilot live streaming of committee hearings, and we got a lot of pushback from the our fellow legislators. Now everything is transparent, and I don't think there's any going back from that at this point. So, okay, we're going to talk about briefly this morning the home contractors bill, and I know one of the reasons we brought in witnesses was in response to Senator Brock's concern and question about, I think what you were saying, Senator Brock, I'll let you rephrase it, but it had to do whether this bill is going to do any good. Do you want to rephrase or solve the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my concerns about the bill is that we are creating something that is fairly intensive in terms of the number of folks who would be brought under its wings. It creates additional bureaucracy and requirements. And among the concerns I have is at the end of the day, when you look at the person who is being victimized by a dishonest contractor, is this bill in fact going to make any difference? I think, Chris, when you were here testifying when this bill was up before, one of my questions was, what's actually going to happen in the event that we have someone identified as a dishonest contractor? How is the victim, the consumer who's the victim, going to recover? Is this bill going to help them? And the answer that I recall was, well, that person will have to go to small claims court and sue, which is no different than it is right now. We heard that there would be more outreach, there would be more ability for contractors to know what their responsibilities are. There would be some better mechanism, and I'm unclear which, for the state, whether it be OPR or the Attorney General's office, to monitor bad behavior. But it still would be a complaint-driven system, which is essentially what we have right now without registration. The other concerns I had were the cost of doing this. We are trying to get people who are low income, people who are minorities, people who are not able to start up small businesses now. And the question I have as part of it is, does this in fact impede them from doing so by creating yet another barrier to entrance into the marketplace? On the one hand, does it increase costs from an insurance perspective because of the insurance that's required? Is in fact that insurance readily available to all those people, particularly the small businesses that are starting out, that would have a burden? As I recall, it was said it's about $500 to do it. And then lastly, as I've been thinking about this over the last several days, the bill really doesn't have anything in it that calls for measurement as to whether or not it actually is accomplishing anything worthwhile. And so there, I've been thinking about how do we measure, how do we evaluate whether or not this bill, if it passes and into law, is actually doing anything worthwhile? How do we measure that? And that again is something that perhaps I toss out to the witnesses as to whether they've given any thought to that. So those are my overall concerns, and also the possibility of thinking about what might, if anything, be added to the bill that would make it better.
So thank you for that, Senator Brock. I'm not sure we're in a position, though it's theoretically possible to add things to the bill, but the last part, the question you made about measurement, I think one of the things we might be able to do is to, well, we'll hear from Lauren, but whether there is some kind of measurement device built in general in the Secretary of State's office, or whether they could promise us a review and coming back. I know it's not the same as a law, but with these folks, I think we would get that response if they committed to that. Your other issues, I'd be interested in hearing, you know, how, if there is to some degree that flaw in this bill, I'm wondering if it exists in every other profession as well. I mean, we license, I don't know how many, we oversee, and this is obviously the softest version, registration versus certification versus licensure. We do all these professions, and you know, we probably learn from experience about how effective some of these things are. So I'm going to let the witnesses jump in any order they want, but it's a good review for us of the bill, even though we're at the you know, we're in the what do they say in football, the red zone with this one. So
Chris, do you want me to go first, or would you like to go first?
Either way, maybe I can start, Lauren, if that makes sense, just to respond to Senator Brock's question about the efficacy of enforcement. And then if you want to build on that and or add any perspective from OPR and answer any other questions that might come up from OPR's perspective, that would help. So I can be brief. Senator Brock, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Christopher Curtis. I'm the chief of the Public Protection Division at the Office of the Attorney General. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about H157, a consumer protection bill that does involve registration of home improvement contractors, among various other provisions. To answer your question, Senator Brock, we believe that the bill does protect consumers and would be an effective measure to implement, both from a consumer protection standpoint, but also, frankly, to make it easier for all parties to come to the table and reach resolution when or if problems arise in this area. And the reason for that is it's not the same system as currently in effect, or the remedy isn't necessarily the same remedy as currently in effect. Because as you know, currently homeowners who are aggrieved may report to any number of different agencies or individuals when a problem arises and they wish to report home improvement fraud or a Consumer Protection Act violation. They might report to the local police, they might report to their state's attorney, they might report to the Attorney General's office. Our consumer assistance program takes those complaints, or they might file suit on their own, a civil suit, to recover damages. So right now, there is no one home in state government to respond to these concerns. Frankly, one of the, we take pains in our testimony over the years on this issue to just point out that while our consumer assistance program data is helpful to elucidate the scope of the problem here, we are not the sole home for these kinds of complaints. And so we actually don't know the full universe of complaints that are out there on this issue. We can only report what is reported to us. So one benefit of this legislation is lawmakers are creating essentially that one home in state government for all these reports to come in. So that's one thing. Secondly, as I understand it, and Director Hibbert can speak to this more eloquently than I can, but having an administrative process rather than a judicial process should save the parties time and money. It's an efficiency measure that state government can employ to get to the bottom quickly and efficiently of what might be going on in a given circumstance. So rather than simply leaving it to the parties or to state government to say, go enforce or go to court for a remedy, you're creating an administrative process wherein the parties can quickly and efficiently come together, have their say, so to speak, And then the Office of Professional Regulation can be part of that conversation. And if enforcement is required, they might enforce themselves, or they might refer to the Attorney General's office, or to, if there's a criminal violation, potentially to criminal authorities. If, on the other hand, a resolution can be reached, there's an administrative tool in the toolbox now, which is to essentially say, if someone is non-participatory or is simply going to not cooperate where there's been some sort of violation, effectively that entity can be sort of unregistered, if you will, administratively. So that's a quick and easy way for consumer to say, if there's a bad actor and there are multiple violations and they're not coming to the table, and OPR has to take that step. That is a very useful measure for consumers to be aware of. So that's fundamentally different than having to go through currently. For somebody to show up on a list of bad actors, you actually have to go and get a criminal conviction under the home improvement fraud statute to then have them listed. So there's a place for consumers to go to see who's a reliable contractor. So this is fundamentally different in many ways than the system as currently constructed. So we believe that is an effective measure. There is no one law that's going to be a panacea for every problem, every concern, but this is another tool in the toolbox, both for consumers and frankly for the contractors, because I think what the contractors gain through this process is a professional administrative home in government who can hear them out. Because one of the things that I will note is that from time to time, in particular during the Sunrise review process, we heard from contractors saying, hey, sometimes the homeowner is the one that's being unreasonable. And we need somebody to hear our version of events and make a determination about reasonableness. So that's another benefit to the contractors as well, instead of just having to end up in litigation, which can be time consuming and expensive if they're required to hire an attorney to represent them. So that's a long answer to a short question, but we do think this would be an effective administrative tool that you can add to the complement of resources and perhaps create a home in state government for both the contractors and for consumers who are aggrieved. Does that answer your question?
It certainly is helpful. It leaves me, again, though, still with a question of how do you measure whether or not the cost outweighs the benefit? How do you measure whether or not you're actually achieving anything that's meaningful compared to where you are by not having done it at all? And are there alternatives other than registering everyone that could collect and deal with the same information without that what some would consider an onerous and time-consuming and costly process?
If it's okay, I'd like to answer that one.
Really what I'm really focused on as to whether or not you've actually accomplished anything.
Yes, I'd like to take a stab at answering that one, if that's okay. For the record, Lauren Hibbert, Director of the Office of Professional Regulation. This bill comes after a Sunrise report review, and that's grounded in Chapter 57 and of Title 26. And that statute is really it's asking all the questions that you're asking, Senator Brock. It's really asking, is regulation necessary? Why is it necessary? And is the regulation doing what it's supposed to do? And we've talked a lot about the Sunrise provisions, but there's also sunset provisions. And look, we are supposed to be consistently reviewing our professions to see whether or not they're meeting the objectives. This bill in front of you has a report back to you. It's section 6 on page 12. It's not called a sunset review. It's not saying that we will use the principles of Chapter 57, but that's what our office will do. We'll look at Chapter 57. We'll create a report back to the legislature. I believe the date was amended to January 15th of 2024. And we'll really try to assess exactly your question. Is this effective? We'll talk about the number and nature of complaints and enforcement actions, how many people we've registered, the resources necessary, and give sort of a chalk line of, is this being effective? I fully expect in the session in 2024, we'll have a live discussion about how effective the administrative program has been. And we have not done many sunsets. I frequently think of the OPR bill and the changes we make in that bill, sort of small sunset reviews. We almost always are modifying a scope of practice or changing how we regulate something to make it less burdensome or more effective. We are currently doing a sunset review of the real estate profession. That's been a very long, multi-stakeholder process, but we have been reviewing whether the real estate profession and the way that we are regulating that profession has been effective. It's leading to a large report that we're in the process of doing. And I think it will lead to concrete changes in our statutes or more likely in our administrative rules. So that is a process that we do regularly at the office, and we are returning to the legislature in January of 2024 with this snapshot report to really give an assessment of how the administrative program is working.
Thank you.
I would like to just jump in. Sometimes anecdotes help, but Senator Brock, I remember lobbying you, I think you were on government operations at the time, on landscape architects, and Vermont was the only state in the country that didn't oversee landscape architects. And I mentioned that because the Sunrise report from the Secretary of State, despite the fact that we're the only state in the country, said that there was no need to regulate landscape architects or supervise. We got the bill through, but it's just an indication that that it's not a knee-jerk reaction at all by the Secretary of State's office when a profession comes to them and says, we need licensure or certification. In that case, they took a really thorough review and came up to the conclusion that we can continue to be the only state in the country without oversight. So I think they're very fair and detailed, in my experience, in those Sunrise reviews.
Yeah,
Senator Clarkson.
yeah, just to tag onto that, I mean, just a reminder, we're one of, and this may have changed in the time lag since we passed this, but we're still one of only 8 states. 42 other states regulate, license, most of them license contractors. And I'd remind us, this is not licensure. This is registration. And this is the lightest touch we can do to a profession that has profound impact on our families' resources and assets. It has the, so again, this is the lightest touch. We have opportunities to measure and review. It comes after a thorough Sunrise review and report. And to create one portal now for complaints and and remedies is, to me, just a huge improvement. So I think this is the right direction, and a very a slow start. This is a beginning, a thoughtful landing place. Many of us would like to have gone to licensure, and we're not. We're starting at registration. So I think that we've already the legislature has come to compromise on this and had pretty strong support in both bodies after, some tough conversations. But I'm really grateful for all the work that the AG's office and the Secretary of State's office has done on this bill. And we've been working on this now for how many years? 8 years. I mean, quite a long time. When was the Sunrise review done, Lauren?
I think in 2016 we filed it.
What-
Maybe 2017.
It was asked for as a result of lots of concerns and legislative discussion.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, so this bill will be on the floor. It's on notice today. It will be on the floor for action on Tuesday. I'd like to proceed on Tuesday. We could, if need be, obviously, I could ask to pass over. I don't see any reason to. So we're not going to be meeting before Tuesday morning. So the committee needs to take a position on what we would like to do in response to the changes made by the House, which I understand from the testimony David Hall gave us yesterday, really the only change they made other than dates because of the year delay is raising the threshold for contracts to 3,500 from what the Senate passed at 2,500. They actually passed it at 3,500, sent it to us. We lowered it to 2,500. They want to stick with their position.
So on the dates, Mr. Chair, in that section 6, or was that one of the dates that got changed? Is that now a year later, or is that the new date, Lauren?
I believe it was changed with the House amendment. But let me just check. I'll look at it right now.
Yeah, it's not on our website yet, and I can't. It must be in the Senate calendar. And I just can't find it quickly to look at that section 6.
It's in this. It would be in the Senate calendar.
Right. I know it's harder to find fast. So anyway, we should look at that because it's either 24 or did they punt it for a year, put it a year out.
Every date was advanced by 1 year.
So it's the new date is?
Yeah, every date in the bill was advanced by 1 year exactly.
Thank you, David. I didn't know you were here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
We got a question that was when we last discussed the bill last session regarding the insurance issue, and I think the average cost was about $500 if I remember correctly. I don't recall, and perhaps Lauren, you may know whether or not there are any potential issues regarding the availability of insurance, particularly for a contractor who does not have a track record.
I don't remember that coming up as an issue. I remember it seeming fairly simple to get the insurance, but I don't have a specific answer. I may be able to find out that answer for you, Senator Brock, but from my memory, it seemed like there was not a problem in the marketplace for someone to obtain that minimum insurance. And I remember the cost being about $500 as well.
The other question I've got is regarding non-compliance for registration. This particular bill, as I recall, there's a $200 penalty if someone fails to register. If the person decides to pay the $200, is there anything else?
Sorry, I was trying to look at the bill and I lost my Zoom screen. So yes, there could be a penalty for failing to register under this chapter. I think I've previously testified and I really maintain we're not a punitive agency. So our first goal will be to get the person registered, particularly as we're onboarding a profession. And we just are in this experience. We just are in the beginning of licensing massage therapists. I can tell you we have had massage therapists who have not been registered, who have come to the attention of our office. We are not prosecuting those individuals unless there's some willful, egregious, flagrant disregard for the law. But we haven't prosecuted any massage therapists. But if a home contractor does not register, we will work with them to get them registered. In the future, 10, 15 years from now, assuming we haven't done a sunset and decided, as the legislature hasn't decided that the program is completely ineffective, when it becomes standard, known that registration is required, we probably would utilize that unauthorized practice section of the law to be more punitive, but I can't imagine that we would use that at this point. We do pursue unauthorized practice charges against some of our professions. Tattooists, nursing are ones that we've done recently. Professions where real harm can be affected, can really affect consumers if you don't hold the credentials and have the required training. And there is routine patterns of blatant disregard for the licensure requirements. But it's not a section of the law that we use all the time.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on that as well, because the question has come up over the years. And, you know, my Attorney General really appreciates building what he likes to call a culture of compliance. And his view is that the vast majority of Vermonters, when given the opportunity to do the right thing, want to do the right thing. And so I think where there are oversights or omissions where someone just didn't know or wasn't sure what to do, or they're not timely because it's a paperwork issue, we really appreciate the emphasis of the Secretary of State's office in saying the goal is to be corrective and to help people achieve compliance so they can feel good about their filings, that everything's in proper order, and so that everybody has the information that they need to have. And I think that's ultimately the goal. And we appreciate that stance from our sister agency.
You know, I'm not particularly concerned about most of the contractors we have in Vermont who will do the right thing, will register, will get the insurance, and will play by the rules. What I'm concerned about is the fly-by-night contractor who is the subject of these complaints about victimizing seniors in particular in home improvement schemes or in taking deposits and walking away. And my concern is this the effective way to change that, and will it make a difference? That's the thing that concerns me the most.
So on that score, I did want to just note, I mean, I think one thing right now that is apparent is in terms of like a list, if you will, of sort of entities that the state has identified, the only list that really exists is the home improvement fraud registry, if you will. So it's like, here's the list of the bad actors, right? But to the extent that somebody hasn't been criminally prosecuted, but may have multiple allegations of multiple infractions and problems and kind of a history of sort of general non-compliance or non-conformity with, you know, community norms, having a registry of those contractors who actually are in compliance, who are doing the right thing, who are trying to satisfy the state requirements, actually provides consumers with that list. So a consumer can now quickly and easily check under this bill who's registered with the state. And if the person they're maybe considering contracting with isn't on that list, that's an immediate red flag for that person. Maybe this isn't the person for me to hire. So I think it does serve a purpose in giving that universal total of like, at a minimum, here are all of the entities in my community who I might want to hire who are actually in compliance and doing the right thing. So it is helpful from that perspective.
And even further, when we have a disciplinary action against somebody who's unregistered, but that fly-by-night person who's unregistered has done fraudulent activity against consumers, we would have a public document that would be searchable by their name on Google, but also on our website. So when you Google someone who we discipline, our disciplinary record shows up in the Google search history, but also on our website, we have all of our discipline, not just the discipline from the people who we license, but the discipline from the people who were unlicensed, who we disciplined. And we do have authority to pursue action against somebody who's unregistered and has fraudulent activity. We would pursue that action. That's a different scenario in my mind than someone who just failed to register, where we would take an educational path. But if you're failing to register and you're fraudulent, we would take a disciplinary tract, and there would be a public record about that conduct.
I certainly understand that. I think one of the pieces of testimony that I remember hearing earlier is that in this particular profession in particular, there is considerable flux among naming conventions that some of these bad actors use. And today it's Curtis Construction, and tomorrow it's Christopher's repair company. And then the day after that, it's C. Curtis and Company. Do you identify in the kind of information that we publicly available the name of the principals behind incorporated or LLCs so that the public can be aware of this kind of situation?
We would probably ask for that in our application process. We would, we have one, when someone creates an application on our office, it's linked to them, their date of birth, their social, their address, those sorts of things. So if the business changes, it would be identifiable to the other businesses. I do believe that. And we do see that, particularly in nail salons, they change their names frequently as well. And the shop number is consistent. So the license number remains the same, even if the business name changes. And we have a process for changing our business name. And of course, we would integrate with corporations where LLCs are registered. So there would be some way to look up the business entity either by license number or through the corporation's website.
Just the last piece, and then I'll stop talking about this today, is in terms of looking at whether or not this regime is working, whether or not the public is in fact using the data that's available and looking up contractors. Would you maintain any measure as to, in effect, how many hits your website is getting of customers or consumers actually looking for the information that you have available? Is that something that you would track?
We do track how many people are using our licensee lookup and our roster. I'm not sure that we have the ability to disaggregate it to home contractors. That would be an IT question that I would need to understand. I don't have the answer for that. I would assume that we could, but I don't know the answer.
To me, it would be an important statistic because it would tell you that you created this tool in the hope that consumers would use it. But if consumers aren't using it, then the tool isn't doing what it's intended. And absent measurement, it's something you would never know.
I agree. I'll have to figure out whether we have that capability.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think part of this will, the success of this whole program will be in the education of both the public and the contracting communities. So I would hope that if and when this bill passes, that it's both our job and the Secretary of State and AG's office to really market and educate the public and the business world about this. And I would hope that would drive, consistently continue to drive people to check out through the Secretary of State's websites, these, the people they're about to hire. People check out, one of the witnesses we heard from 2 years ago, it said one of the frustrations was that she had no objective source for that information, and that all the searches on whether or not this contractor was any good were all actually ended up being reports from friends of his, and there was no objective data on whether that person was a viable, respected contractor. So that's what I'm hoping, is that, well, through education and public marketing, we will actually educate people to go to this site to check out people before they hire them. And they should be doing that with plumbers, electricians. We do it word of mouth a lot of times, but that can also be supplemented. And increasingly people are supplementing word of mouth with checking things out on the internet.
No, I think that's very important. I think it's very valid, but the real test is measurement.
Yep.
Are they using it or aren't they using it? And that, I think, is imperative to know, because it tells you whether or not what you are trying to do is in fact being accomplished or not.
And Randy will also have the number of complaints. So we know that there are hundreds and hundreds of complaints about this right now. We will be able to track over time how many complaints come into the Secretary of State's office through
Well,
this.
you can do that though right now by having all the people who receive complaints forward them to the Secretary of State or the Attorney General without registering anybody. And that again is almost a measure. Are you getting more complaints after creating this than you had before? Right now, we don't have a measurement to know what we're getting before because it's being dispersed.
Well,
I think it's an interesting discussion. I think the points that Senator Brock raised are legitimate. However, no, let me let me learn from our training from CSG. They are good points, and I think that they are right now. We have more or less the Wild West out there, and we shouldn't be sacrificing some progress and the good in search of the perfect. And I think that probably applies to most bills we do. This bill could, for instance, have a measurement requirement. We found out it does have a reporting requirement, but a measurement requirement, like what Senator Brock says, we can adjust the bill later on, but we shouldn't be paralyzed, in my mind, of not doing the heart of the bill at this point. So while I appreciate in the CSG context, I appreciate the comments of Senator Brock, I think that we still should not stay where we are and not make this. I think it's more than just an interim step, but I think it's a very meaningful step, and we can fine tune it as we go forward. Did I do well in the CSG training there? I don't know.
you did very well. But I think I think Randy's questions are terrific. I wish we could measure absolutely everything we do in state government. And we don't do longitudinal studies on the success of the programs we institute. So we don't do them on almost anything, and because we're not willing to afford them. And I wish we did, because boy, would it, it would be great. And so we've got them in some of the things we've done, the new worker program, some of the more recent ones we have, but the minute they stop being new and shiny, people stop tracking them because it costs money. And I think the Government Accountability Committee, if we invested seriously in measuring the effect of our choices and our programs, it would be great. And so I would encourage us to think about that.
So we need to move on. I just want to, before we discuss what position we're going to take, I just want to say, yes, we have been working on this for many years, and I can't lose sight of the fact that this is either the second highest or the highest area of complaints, consumer complaints, that the Attorney General gets. And for us to do nothing, I think would be a dereliction of our duty. So
Yeah.
I want to ask at this point, I don't, is Becca with us? I don't think she is.
No, but
We'll proceed.
we can hold the vote open.
We can. I guess the choices are to concur with further amendment, to ask for a conference committee, or to concur with the technical changes and the going back to the 3,500. I would. Let me just pause and very quickly get the AG and the Secretary of State have brought us this bill. They have been the lead advocates on this bill. Do you feel there's any great distinction, or do you want to weigh in on what the House has proposed on the 3,500?
The Office of Professional Regulation supports the House amendment.
Okay.
We support the House amendment, and I think, we were talking about, costs during the pandemic, and some costs have gone up. And so the $3,500, you may in fact, in reality, be capturing, essentially more or less the same number of jobs with that provision. So there are some, realities going on in the marketplace right now that reflect that, and we think it's a reasonable request.
Okay. So at this point, I want to ask my vice chair her thoughts, because I know you've been the most vocal of saying that the Senate was at 1,000 at one point, and you feel we're going to lose too many, and whether you're
It
okay. with it.
concerns me because the data we have from the AG's office was that it was actually the threshold for complaint was actually quite low, was between sort of $1,000 and $3,000, and that is the bulk of the complaints were people losing actually not vast amounts of money, as I recall. Is that correct, Chris? I mean, I have it here in my notes somewhere, but it's so on the other hand, I respect compromise, and I respect the House's work on this and what they had to do to get to yes. And I want us to get to yes to at least take this step forward, which I think is a very productive step in protecting Vermonters.
Right. And
So
they did
I'm willing to concur and support the House's position at the moment.
And just to refresh people's memory, they did concur with where we spent a lot of time on the so-called CODA amendment to exempt some of the other licensed professions from having to duplicate.
Yes, which was duplicative in some ways.
Right. Okay. So just, have we convinced you, Senator Brock, or are you gonna?
I'm afraid not.
Okay, sorry to hear that. Senator Hinsdale, Ram Hinsdale, are you okay with the House's proposal?
I am.
Okay, so, and I am too, so we'll leave that vote open for Senator Ballant and Senator Clarkson. This was your bill to report, so I assume you will, if it's okay with you, you'll get up on Tuesday and say we concur and why we did.
I'm ready to rock and roll.
I'm not sure, we'll find out. I'm not sure how that gets reported, whether the committee vote gets reported or not, but we'll find that out in.
I think it should.
Usually I stand up and say the Senate Economic Development Committee voted on a vote of blah, blah, blah to concur with the House
Okay.
on their further proposals of amendment.
I'm just wondering, I don't think we, certainly at this point, I don't think we have to file anything with the secretary's office. You just get up and when it comes up, when it gets called up, and say what our position is.
Right, correct.
Okay. All right, let us take a 10-minute break to 9:55, and we'll pick up with Commissioner Goldstein.
Right.
Well, thank you, David.
Thank you, Lauren and Chris.